There are 3 hidden desires that the female brain conceals even from itself, and a man can awaken them without touching her. They are desires engraved in the oldest layers of the mind, where reason and emotion intertwine with memories, scents, sounds, and gestures. They are not whims or culturally learned fantasies. They are impulses belonging to the instinct, the part of human biology that seeks connection before contact. For years, the neuropsychology of desire has shown something that still makes people uncomfortable. Female pleasure is more connected to emotional anticipation than to physical stimulation. The brain reacts first to a sense of safety and the perception of total attention. Only when these 2 conditions are present does the body release the substances that create well-being and openness. That is why many men confuse arousal with desire and speed with connection. The first hidden desire of the female brain is to feel understood without words. That is the root of magnetism. When someone can interpret a gesture, a pause, a look, or a silence without demanding explanations, the female brain releases dopamine and oxytocin, the same hormones that appear when a person recalls a moment of tenderness or discovery. In that instant, the mind associates the observer with something valuable, almost impossible to forget. And it all happens without touch, only through the precise reading of emotions. The second hidden desire is trust in presence. Not in strength or insistence, but in the serenity of someone who does not need to rush anything. When a woman perceives calmness in another person, her nervous system regulates itself. Cortisol levels, the stress hormone, drop, and her body synchronizes with that frequency. It's an involuntary process. Mirror neurons replicate the other person's emotional state. That's why calm creates attraction, and anxiety destroys it. A present man, aware of his gestures, creates a space where a woman can lower her guard, and that simple act already awakens sensations the mind associates with pleasure. The third hidden desire is the freedom to be herself without judgment. The female brain has a more active limbic system than the male. It processes every emotional experience with greater intensity. If she feels she must repress or fake, pleasure fades. But when she senses acceptance, when she can express herself without fear of being misunderstood, the brain releases serotonin and endorphins, the same chemical mix that produces euphoria and well-being. That feeling does not depend on a concrete action, but on the absence of threat. For this reason, female emotional pleasure is essentially a form of biological trust. These 3 desires operate silently, almost invisibly, yet they shape every intimate and emotional experience. They are not tricks or techniques, they are keys. And they are only activated by those who observe with attention, who know how to hear the nuances of an emotion before it becomes a word. Understanding this changes the way one looks. A man who learns to read the emotion behind a gaze stops searching for external formulas. He begins to understand that true pleasure, the emotional kind, the one that transforms the experience, arises when 2 nervous systems feel safe with each other. That's when what neuroscience calls affective synchrony occurs. Heart rhythms adjust, breathing harmonizes, and tones of voice align. That synchrony is what the brain interprets as union and satisfaction. That's why I say only men who do this awaken the highest pleasure in her. It's not about power, but about understanding. About knowing that female desire responds to invisible stimuli, full attention, calmness, and emotional validation. When these 3 coincide, the female brain enters a state of total openness. And at that point, every gesture takes on a deeper meaning. When we understand that the 3 hidden desires of the female brain are anticipation, presence, and emotional freedom, we uncover something fascinating. These 3 forces not only define how pleasure is experienced, but also how human connection is built. Each one functions like a layer of emotional language. The more attuned they are, the deeper the sense of trust, connection, and fulfillment. The first element, anticipation, is a neurobiological phenomenon. The moment someone expects something pleasurable, their brain begins releasing dopamine even before the stimulus occurs. That chemical release acts as a learning mechanism. The stronger the anticipation, the more deeply the following experience is imprinted in memory. That's why anticipation isn't empty waiting. It's an internal laboratory where sensations are prepared. When a man manages to create that kind of healthy anticipation through empathetic communication, eye contact, or consistency between his words and actions, the woman's brain interprets that coherence as a promise already fulfilled. The result is that her nervous system relaxes and her sense of well-being rises. The neuroscience of desire calls this affective prediction. The brain imagines what's about to happen and adjusts its physiological responses in advance. In other words, pleasure begins in the mind, in the representation of what feels safe, intriguing, or emotionally stimulating. This explains why bonds built on patience and attentive communication generate stronger responses than those driven by haste. Time, pause, and attentive listening aren't slowness. They are the biological prelude to trust. The second desire, presence, is the hardest to master and, paradoxically, the most powerful. In an era flooded with distractions, offering real attention has become almost a revolutionary act. The human brain is designed to detect the quality of attention it receives. If it senses disinterest or fragmentation, it activates stress circuits. If it senses genuine presence, it releases oxytocin, the hormone that builds attachment and belonging. To be present means listening with the whole body, with the eyes, the voice, the posture. It means not anticipating a reply, but allowing the other person to feel safe expressing themselves without interruption. Studies from the Kinsey Institute and Harvard University show that women exhibit greater activation in brain regions linked to emotional reading and empathy. That's why they can instantly sense when someone is truly listening. Presence isn't proven through grand gestures, but through micro-expressions, the rhythm of breathing, and the silence that allows another's voice to unfold. It's the difference between talking to respond and talking to understand. When a man develops this kind of presence, he becomes a soothing stimulus for a woman's nervous system. She no longer feels the need to protect herself. She feels safe to open up. That sense of emotional safety activates the same neural circuits involved in creativity, curiosity, and pleasure. Modern psychology calls this emotional resonance, two minds tuning to each other until their biological rhythms synchronize. That synchronization is the foundation of deep intimacy. The third desire, emotional freedom, arises when the female mind feels she can exist without masks. Society has taught women to tone down their emotions, to avoid seeming too sensitive or too intense. But the brain doesn't understand those labels. When emotion is repressed, the body finds other ways to express it, sometimes through anxiety or disconnection. That's why creating spaces where a woman can express herself authentically has a direct impact on her biological well-being. In that state, the limbic system releases serotonin and endorphins, neurotransmitters associated with calm and satisfaction. Emotional freedom isn't a luxury, it's a neurochemical necessity. Interpersonal psychology explains that emotional validation, the feeling of being understood without being corrected, changes how the brain encodes experiences. What's associated with acceptance builds positive attachment. What's associated with judgment creates withdrawal. A man who offers genuine listening, acceptance, and a touch of humor reduces the hyperactivity of the amygdala, the brain's fear center, and makes emotional openness possible. That's where the feeling of absolute trust begins. Understanding these three dynamics transforms the way we relate to one another. Desire stops being a search for external stimulation and becomes an inner dance between two nervous systems learning to communicate. The body responds, yes, but the source is mental and emotional. That's why relationships that prioritize attention, empathy, and curiosity generate a deeper, longer-lasting sense of fulfillment. It's not about control, but about creating an environment where the brain feels free to explore pleasure and affection. Throughout history, Many cultures have described this form of connection through spiritual metaphors: the balance between masculine and feminine energy, the flow of breath, the union of life force. Today, science gives it another name: emotional co-regulation. Every time two people truly listen to each other, their brains adjust their electrical rhythms and heartbeats. This phenomenon, proven through neuroimaging studies, explains why sometimes a single glance or phrase can completely shift another person's emotional state. That is the essence of human influence and of shared pleasure. Learning to awaken these three desires isn't manipulation. It's learning to speak the biology of trust. A man who masters anticipation creates curiosity and safety. One who practices presence builds calm and openness. And one who offers emotional freedom evokes gratitude and lasting memory. The combination of all three produces a state of well-being that the brain interprets as total pleasure. So next time you hear about desire, remember this: it's not just about attraction, it's about biological synchrony. The female body, when it feels understood and free, responds with the same intensity an artist feels when inspiration strikes. And that moment, when the mind feels seen and accepted, is the closest science has come to describing ultimate pleasure. That's why only men who learn to do this awaken something far deeper than desire. They awaken trust, tenderness, curiosity, and memory. And memory, in the language of the brain, is the most lasting form of pleasure.